Hey guys! Recently I've seen some singers talking in some singing forums about whether or not it's a good idea for us to be practicing our singing while driving or in a vehicle. And I've seen a couple singing teachers who have expressed their views on this topic, and today I want to weigh in on this subject as well. The question about whether or not it's a good idea for us to be practicing our singing while in a vehicle really centers on safety and effectiveness. Is it safe for us, both vocally and in terms of operating a big vehicle, for us to be practicing our singing? And is it effective? Is that time sitting behind the wheel productive for us as students of voice? Now, I am a multitasker. I'm a multitasker partly because of my personality, because I'm very type A, and partly out of necessity. I have a lot of things going on in my life. I have 4 children up until this past July. I was homeschooling them for 8 years. I have competitive dancers amongst them. We're always at the dance studio. I'm driving kids to baseball fields and soccer fields. On top of that, piano lessons. I'm a busy person. I don't have a lot of time in my day. And so I have to try to make the most of the time that I have. If I'm sitting in the waiting room at the dance studio, I am working on my business. I'm emailing people, I'm editing videos. I'm always multitasking and trying to really use my time wisely. And I don't think that I'm necessarily the exception to the rule. I think that with our lifestyle, our modern lifestyle, so many of us have our schedules just packed full of things. We have so many responsibilities, so many priorities, and sometimes singing, if we're not professionals, singing gets pushed aside and it gets kind of fit in between all of the other responsibilities and priorities in our lives. A few weeks ago, my teaching pastor at my church, he did this little demonstration, this analogy, and he started off with a glass pitcher, and he said it kind of represents our lives. And then he proceeded to put rocks inside that pitcher, and each of those rocks represented some sort of priority or responsibility in our lives. So there was one for work, and there was one for marriage, and there was one for kids, and there was one for friends, and so forth. And so he started to fill up this pitcher, and it was full at one point. And he says, "Is this full?" And then he realized, well, I've got all these other little interests and hobbies and responsibilities and stuff that maybe are not the biggest priority, but there's still things that I want to fit into my life. So then he starts to pour sand into that pitcher, and the sand begins to fill up all the gaps. Just like how those little things that we do in our lives tend to fill in the spaces between the bigger responsibilities or priorities. And for a lot of us, that's what singing is. It's the sand. And I don't think it's necessarily good or bad. It's sometimes just reality. And then the pastor went on and he actually said, well, now it looks really full, right? And then he was still able to pour some water in there. And if you're type A like me, then you completely understand this, because I do a lot of sand pouring and a lot of water pouring into my life. So unfortunately, sometimes singing can be sand in our lives. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't make the most of the time that we do have to be able to sing and practice our singing, even if that means that we're doing it in a vehicle. Now, of course, it's not an ideal situation, right? There are lots of reasons why it might not be a good idea for us to be practicing, at least not really working on technique while we're driving. One of the reasons why singing in a vehicle is not always a great idea is because the seats that we're sitting in tend to encourage poor body alignment. So we're not necessarily going to be able to support our singing tone with our breath in ways that we could if we were standing up, for example. So we tend to kind of be semi-reclined, right? Our seats are sitting back a little bit. We can move them forward a bit, but then we're in bucket seats and that rolls our shoulders forward, and then we've got headrests that force our heads forward a little bit. And then when we're in a seated position to begin with, our abdominal muscles are a little shortened, so everything's a little bit off. Our pelvis is tilted, right? And so it's not necessarily the best position for our bodies to be in for singing. It doesn't mean that we can't sing from that position, however. A second reason why it's not necessarily ideal for us to be practicing our singing in a vehicle is the noise factor. When we are driving, there's a lot of ambient noise that we have to contend with. There's the hum of the motor. There's the sound of the traffic outside of the vehicle. There might be the sound of the vents, the fans from your air conditioner or from your heating system. And then there may be screaming children in the back seat. And so what we tend to do when we're listening to music in the vehicle is we have to turn up the volume to be able to hear the music over top of all of that ambient noise. And then when we want to sing along, we tend to have to turn up our voices to be able to hear ourselves over top of that loud music. And the next thing you know, we're pushing and we're forcing. And that is the kind of singing practice that leads to strain, that leads to us feeling not so great, and that can be really unproductive. And a third reason why it may not be ideal for us to be practicing our singing, at least not really focusing on our singing, is that we're operating a vehicle, right? We want to make sure that safety is prioritized. We want to make sure that we're paying attention to what's going on around us on the roadway. So we want to make sure that whatever practicing or singing we're doing in the vehicle is not distracting us from being able to safely operate that vehicle. Now, that being said, I personally believe that we can make really good use of our time while we're commuting back and forth to work, chauffeuring our children around. One of the things that we can do is straw phonation. I have a lot of students who keep straws in their vehicles, and they use them. They do some scales and sirens through them while they're driving back and forth to work. It's a great thing to be able to use to recalibrate your instrument, especially if you work at a job where you are doing a lot of talking, you're using your voice a lot during the day. I have students who will do some straw phonation on the way to work to sort of recalibrate their instruments, get them set and ready to go for a lot of voice use during the day. And then they will use the straws again on the drive home. And they will recalibrate their instruments, and they'll help to give those instruments a reset so that they can be healthy and ready to go for the evening. And I think straw phonation is a great thing that we can be doing while we're driving. It's going to help us to square up the vocal folds so that we're not using too much vocal weight or too little vocal weight. And I feel like it really just gets the whole system going really nicely. A second thing that we can do when we're driving to make the most use of our time is to take that time to learn new songs. Now, we're not necessarily going to be working on the technical aspects of the songs, but we can use that time to learn the lyrics and the melody and the vocal phrasing. This just basically gives us a head start. So when we do have the time to set aside to really have focused practice, we already know the music. We already know the song. Now, a third thing that we can do while we're driving is we can start listening to other singers and learning from them. We can listen to the qualities of their voices. We can listen to the stylistic elements that they add. If we're learning a different style of music and we want to make sure that we create an authentic sound, we can listen to how those singers produce those sounds. We can listen to how they use different vocal registration options to be able to create certain artistic effects. We can learn a lot from other singers just by listening to them. And then we can maybe go home and we can experiment with our own voices. We can try different sounds. We can try them in the vehicle too. If they're not like really intense, they don't require a lot of athleticism. If we're just toying around with different qualities, I don't personally see any reason why we shouldn't be able to do that while we're driving. Now, a fourth thing that we can do to use our time behind the wheel wisely is to learn how to harmonize or to practice our harmony skills. I listen to a lot of musical theater, and I love the ensemble pieces when they have multi-part harmony and all these really interesting parts woven together. And I just take turns singing different parts, and I really learn to listen to how different harmony parts work together and fit together and how they're created, because there are really different styles of harmonizing. I also love the music of the 60s. I love your Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel and Herman's Hermits and so forth. And they're really strong and very focused on harmony. And I love to be able to use my commute time to sing along to those and to practice coming up with harmony parts, even for music that doesn't necessarily have harmony in it. I work on that. And it's a great way for me to really hone those skills. And another reason why I say you should sing while you're driving is that casual singing, just singing for the pure joy of it, has proven benefits for us emotionally and mentally. And the fact of the matter is that nothing is going to stop us from singing anyway. We're going to be singing. I always call it like an occupational hazard. I'm always humming. I'm always singing everywhere I go. There's nothing that's going to stop you from singing. You just want to be able to sing in a safe and healthy manner. You don't want to be forcing and pushing your voice. You don't necessarily want to be working on a lot of vocal skills that require heavy athleticism, or you don't want to be necessarily experimenting with your voice, especially with really extreme sounds or intense sounds. That's the kind of thing that you should practice when you have time to really put all your full attention on your singing. Not every singing time needs to be about practicing technique. Sometimes we just sing for the pure joy of singing, and we're going to do it anyway. So why not fit that into our schedule in a way that makes sense for us? And if that means that we do it while we're commuting to and from work, we're spending an hour a day, sometimes 2 hours a day driving, why not spend that time wisely? Why waste that time? Just be realistic about what you can expect to accomplish or how much you can expect to accomplish when you're practicing your singing behind the wheel.